The wind howled over the barren surface of Ranos 9, a world that time had forgotten. Once lush with life and the hum of civilization, it now lay in ruin, its cracked soil littered with the remnants of a people who had vanished so completely that even the stars seemed to have erased their memory. Sandstorms swept across its lifeless plains, erasing footprints as quickly as they were made, burying secrets that had been hidden for centuries. Thomas Reed trudged forward against the gale, his face shielded by the visor of his environmental suit. The heads-up display flickered with warnings. Radiation levels rising, storm intensity critical. He ignored them. He was no stranger to danger. Once a soldier, he had fought his way through wars on worlds far more unforgiving than this. But this was different. This was a mission of mercy, not conquest. And despite the desolation around him, something about this place gnawed at the edges of his mind, as though the planet itself was watching, waiting. He glanced at the object cradled in his gloved hands, a small, weather-beaten container of medical supplies. It was almost laughable how inadequate it felt. The colonists who had called for aid were scattered across Ranos 9's southern hemisphere, their signals faint, desperate. He didn't even know if they were still alive. But he couldn't shake the thought of someone out there, clinging to life, hoping against hope that someone would answer their call. Thomas pushed onward, his boots crunching over a jagged crust of earth that seemed to vibrate faintly underfoot. At first, he dismissed it as the storm's fury, but the sensation grew stronger, a rhythmic pulse, faint yet unmistakable. He paused, his heart quickening. There was no life left on Ranos 9, not anymore. So what was this? He scanned the horizon. The storm's haze blurred the line between earth and sky, painting everything in a monochrome of ash and rust. But then, faintly, he saw it, a shadow in the distance. It was too small to be a building, too still to be one of the planet's infamous sand leviathans. Curiosity tugged at him, overriding caution. Adjusting his course, Thomas set off toward the figure. As he approached, the outline resolved into something more distinct. A solitary figure slumped against a jagged spire of rock. At first, he thought it was human, one of the colonists perhaps. But as he drew closer, he realized how wrong he was. The figure was draped in a flowing garment, tattered and faded to a dull gray that blended with the dust. Its limbs were unnaturally slender, its elongated fingers clutching the rock as though it were the only anchor keeping it tethered to the world. The head was bowed, a hood concealing its features, but Thomas could see enough to know this was no colonist, no human. He hesitated. His training screamed at him to retreat. This could be anything, a trap, a biohazard, or worse. But then he heard it, a faint, rasping sound, barely audible over the wind. Breathing. Against every instinct, he knelt beside the figure. Up close, its frailty was even more apparent. The alien's chest rose and fell with laborious effort, each breath a struggle. Its skin, pale and translucent, was etched with faint glowing lines that pulsed faintly, mirroring the vibrations in the ground. Those markings, there was something familiar about them, something he couldn't quite place. "Hey," he said, his voice muffled by his helmet. He reached out a cautious hand, but stopped short, unsure if touch would harm it. Or him. "Can you hear me? Are you alive?" The figure stirred, the hood slipping back to reveal a face both beautiful and haunting. Her features were sharp and angular, her eyes closed but framed by lashes so delicate they seemed to shimmer in the faint light. The glowing lines on her skin converged at her temples, forming an intricate pattern that reminded him of ancient star maps. This was no ordinary alien. This was something old, ancient. Her eyes fluttered open, and Thomas found himself staring into twin orbs of silver, swirling with faint traces of blue. For a moment, she looked through him as though he were nothing more than another phantom of the storm. Then her gaze sharpened, and her lips parted. "Why have you come?" The words were soft, barely audible, but they carried a weight that made Thomas feel as though the ground beneath him might give way. Her voice was melodic, yet strained, like an instrument long out of tune. "I'm here to help," he said, fumbling for the right words. "You look like you need it." Her lips curved into a faint, bitter smile. "Help? No one comes here to help." The wind howled louder, as though in agreement. Thomas felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. He glanced around, suddenly aware of how exposed they were. "We need to get you out of here. Do you have shelter nearby? Somewhere safe?" She closed her eyes, her head tilting back against the rock. "There is no safety," she murmured. "Not anymore. Not for me." "What do you mean? Who are you?" Her gaze snapped back to his, and for the first time, Thomas saw fear in those silver eyes. Fear and something else, something deeper. "You don't understand. You shouldn't have found me. They will come now." "They? Who's they?" he asked, but she didn't answer. Instead, she slumped forward, her strength fading as quickly as it had come. Thomas barely caught her, his arms wrapping around her frail form. She was impossibly light, as though the wind itself might carry her away. The pulsing vibration beneath the ground grew stronger, resonating through his boots. A low, distant hum reached his ears, sending a shiver down his spine. He looked up, scanning the storm-filled horizon. Somewhere, out in the haze, lights flickered, faint, unnatural, and moving fast. "Damn it," he muttered. Adjusting his grip, he hoisted the alien woman into his arms. Whatever was coming, he had no intention of sticking around to find out. As he stumbled through the storm, questions swirled in his mind. Who was she? What had she meant by they? And why, despite every warning blaring in his suit, did he feel as though finding her was the beginning of something far bigger than himself? Above him, the storm clouds churned, their thunderous roars masking the approach of something that didn't belong in the skies of Ranos 9. Something that was hunting. The storm did not relent. Sheets of abrasive sand clawed at Thomas's suit, the filtered visor barely enough to pierce the swirling chaos ahead. Every step felt heavier, not just from the added burden of the alien woman in his arms, but from the growing sense that something vast and unseen was converging on them. Ilaria. That was the name she had whispered before her strength failed completely. It hung in his mind like a riddle, ancient and unknowable. The faint glow of her skin pulsed in rhythm with the vibrations beneath the ground, casting eerie patterns against the storm-darkened horizon. He glanced at her face, slack with exhaustion, yet still marked by an unearthly beauty. Even unconscious, she radiated a quiet power, fragile but unyielding. "Stay with me, Ilaria," Thomas muttered, though she gave no sign of hearing. He tightened his grip, trudging forward as his navigation system struggled to recalculate. The beacon for his dropship blinked faintly in the corner of his visor's display. It wasn't far, just over the next ridge if the storm didn't mislead him. But something told him the ship was no longer safe. The lights in the storm had grown closer. He hadn't imagined them. They moved with precision, sweeping in erratic patterns as though searching. His training kicked in, a sharp, instinctual tug in the back of his mind. This wasn't random. Someone, or something, was tracking them. He scanned the terrain, his eyes catching on the jagged silhouette of a canyon wall rising to his left. It wasn't the most defensible position, but it offered cover and might buy him time to think. Adjusting Ilaria in his arms, he veered toward it. The entrance to the canyon was narrow, the walls towering above like the ribs of a colossal beast. Here, the storm's roar softened. The wind funneled into a mournful wail that echoed between the rocks. Thomas set Ilaria down gently against the base of the wall, his hands lingering as he checked her pulse. It was faint but steady, her glowing veins dimming and brightening like the dying embers of a fire. "What are you?" he murmured, though he didn't expect an answer. She stirred slightly, her lips parting, but the sound she made was too faint to understand. Thomas leaned closer, but before he could make sense of her words, his comm system crackled to life. "Unknown signals detected. Proximity alert. 500 meters. His stomach tightened. He pulled his rifle from its sling, the familiar weight reassuring but not comforting. A quick scan of the canyon entrance revealed shifting shadows, the faintest hint of movement where there should have been none. "Ilaria," he said, his voice low but firm, "we're not alone." Her eyes fluttered open, the silver orbs clouded but focused enough to lock onto his. "They come," she rasped, her voice stronger than before but laden with fear. "You must leave me. They will not stop until I am taken." "Not a chance," Thomas snapped, scanning the entrance again. The shadows were closer now, resolving into figures clad in dark, streamlined armor that absorbed the weak light. He counted 3, no, 4, moving with an unsettling, synchronized grace. Ilaria reached for his arm, her fingers trembling but insistent. "You do not understand. They are not here for you. Leave, and you may yet survive." "Survival's not worth much if it costs me my soul," Thomas shot back. He shifted his stance, his rifle trained on the advancing figures. "Besides, I've got a rule. I don't leave people behind." She stared at him, something unreadable flickering across her face. "Foolish," she murmured, though there was a strange softness in her tone. The first shot came without warning. A bolt of energy struck the rock just above Thomas's head, sending shards of stone raining down. He ducked, returning fire in a series of short, controlled bursts. The canyon lit up with the staccato glow of muzzle flashes and energy pulses, the air thick with the acrid tang of burnt ozone. The attackers moved with uncanny precision, their movements almost mechanical. One broke off to flank him, its footsteps unnaturally silent on the rocky terrain. Thomas caught the motion out of the corner of his eye and spun, a single, well-placed shot dropping the figure mid-step. The armor cracked open as it fell, revealing a glimpse of something inside, something not entirely human. "No time to think about that," he muttered, pivoting back to face the others. Ilaria had pulled herself upright against the wall, her glowing veins flaring brighter with each passing second. Her breathing was labored, but her eyes burned with an intensity that hadn't been there before. "Thomas," she called, her voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. "You must listen. They are not alive as you are. They do not feel. They do not tire. You cannot win this fight." "Not planning to win," he grunted, firing again. "Just planning to get us out alive." The second figure advanced, a blade of crackling energy springing from its gauntlet. It lunged with inhuman speed, but Thomas sidestepped, his rifle's butt slamming into the side of its helmet with a satisfying crunch. Before he could fire again, the third figure closed the distance, tackling him to the ground. The impact drove the air from his lungs, the rifle skittering out of reach. Thomas grappled with the attacker, his fists finding purchase against its unyielding armor. It was like fighting a statue. The figure raised its weapon, and for a brief, terrifying moment, Thomas thought this was the end. Then the air around them shifted. A low, resonant hum filled the canyon, rising in pitch until it was almost unbearable. The glowing lines on Ilaria's skin flared like a supernova, bathing the canyon in harsh white light. The figure above him froze, its movement stuttering as though caught in a glitch. Thomas seized the moment, throwing it off and scrambling to his feet. The remaining attackers stood motionless, their heads tilted as if listening to a sound only they could hear. Ilaria's voice rang out, no longer weak but commanding, resonant. "Begone." The light intensified, and the figures convulsed, their bodies collapsing into heaps of lifeless metal and flesh. The hum faded, leaving only the sound of Thomas's ragged breathing and the faint, steady pulse of Ilaria's glow. Thomas stared at the remains of the attackers, his mind racing. What the hell just happened? Ilaria slumped back against the wall, the light in her veins dimming once more. She looked at him, her silver eyes weary but resolute. "You were not meant to see this," she said. "But now you are bound to it. To me." "Bound to what?" he demanded. "To the truth," she said simply. Then her eyes rolled back, and she collapsed, leaving Thomas alone with more questions than answers. Above them, the storm began to clear, revealing the faint outline of distant ships descending from the heavens. Whatever truth Ilaria carried, it was clear they weren't the only ones searching for it. The quiet after the battle was almost unbearable. The storm had faded, leaving only a thin haze of dust swirling in the canyon's wake. The bodies of the attackers lay strewn across the rocky floor, their lifeless forms alien in their stillness. Thomas Reed stood among the wreckage, rifle at the ready, his every nerve on edge. He'd seen death before, too much of it. But this was different. These figures weren't human, not entirely. Their shattered armor revealed glimpses of sinew fused with wires, of flesh grafted to circuitry in ways that defied both biology and engineering. The hum of their defeat lingered in his ears, an echo of the resonance Ilaria had unleashed. He glanced at her, slumped against the canyon wall, her face ashen, her chest rising and falling in shallow breaths. She looked more fragile than ever, her otherworldly glow reduced to faint flickers that seemed to dim with every passing second. Thomas knelt beside her, his fingers hovering near her shoulder, hesitant. "Ilaria," he said softly, his voice raw from shouting over the storm. "You with me?" Her eyes fluttered open, the silver in them dulled, her focus hazy. "You should not have stayed," she whispered, the words barely audible. "Yeah, well, I've never been good at taking advice," he replied, forcing a wry smile. "And besides, you didn't really leave me much choice. You saved me back there, whatever that was." Her gaze sharpened for a moment, something ancient and knowing flickering in her expression. "It was not for you," she said. "It was for the balance." Before Thomas could press her for an explanation, a faint hum cut through the silence. His visor display lit up with an urgent warning. "Incoming signatures detected. Multiple contacts. ETA 90 seconds. "Damn it," he muttered, scanning the sky. The ships he'd spotted earlier were closing in fast, their sharp, angular silhouettes cutting through the dust like predatory birds. These weren't scavengers or colonists. They were military-grade vessels, bristling with weaponry and painted in the unmistakable black and red insignia of the Chris Consortium, a regime notorious for its ruthless efficiency and insatiable appetite for control. Thomas's grip on his rifle tightened. He'd heard enough stories about Governor Elena Chris to know what her forces did to anyone who stood in their way. And now, they were coming for Ilaria. "We need to move," Thomas said, his tone brooking no argument. He slipped an arm under Ilaria's frail form, hoisting her up as gently as he could. She groaned but didn't resist, her head lolling against his shoulder. "Stay with me, okay? I'm not leaving you here." Her response was little more than a whisper. "You cannot fight them. You should run." "Running is the plan," Thomas said, though his stomach twisted at the thought. Running wasn't in his nature, but this wasn't a fight he could win, not against ships armed to the teeth and a battalion of soldiers who'd likely shoot first and ask questions later. The canyon narrowed ahead, its walls curving into a maze of jagged rock. Thomas set off at a brisk pace, his boots crunching over the uneven terrain. Behind him, the hum of the approaching ships grew louder, joined by the faint whine of drones scouting ahead. Ilaria stirred in his arms, her eyes fluttering open again. "They will not stop," she said, her voice stronger now, though still tinged with a haunting weariness. "Not until they have what they seek." "And what is that?" Thomas asked, his frustration bubbling to the surface. "What do they want with you?" Her gaze met his, and for a moment he thought she might tell him, but then her expression hardened, her lips pressing into a thin line. "It is not for you to know," she said simply. Thomas gritted his teeth, biting back a retort. He didn't have time to argue, and the answers would mean nothing if they didn't make it out alive. The sound of the drones grew louder, their sharp, mechanical buzz echoing off the canyon walls. Thomas ducked into a narrow crevice, pressing himself and Ilaria against the cool stone. He peeked out, his visor's display highlighting the sleek, insect-like forms of the drones as they swept the area with bright, oscillating beams of light. He held his breath, his grip on his rifle tightening. The drones hovered for a moment, their searchlights skimming over the rocks, then moved on, their hum fading into the distance. Thomas let out a slow, shaky exhale. That was close, he muttered, shifting Ilaria's weight in his arms. But as he stepped out of the crevice, the ground beneath him trembled. A deep, resonant vibration coursed through the canyon, the same pulse he'd felt earlier, but stronger now, more insistent. He froze, his eyes darting to Ilaria. Her glowing veins had flared to life again, their light pulsing in time with the vibration. "What's happening?" he asked, his voice low but urgent. Ilaria's eyes widened, her expression a mix of fear and something else, something that looked almost like recognition. "It awakens," she said, her voice barely a whisper. Before Thomas could ask what she meant, the ground beneath his feet cracked open with a deafening roar. He stumbled back, clutching Ilaria as a massive chasm split the canyon floor, jagged shards of rock tumbling into the abyss. From the depths came a blinding light, searing and golden, accompanied by a sound that was less a noise and more a presence, a deep, resonant hum that seemed to vibrate in his very bones. Ilaria reached out toward the light, her fingers trembling. "It is here," she murmured, her voice reverent. "The Guardian." "The what now?" Thomas demanded, but she didn't answer. Her gaze was fixed on the light, her expression one of awe and fear. From the chasm, something began to rise. At first, it was little more than a shadow against the golden glow, but as it ascended, its form became clear. It was massive, a construct of gleaming metal and stone, its surface etched with the same intricate patterns that marked Ilaria's skin. Its eyes, if they could be called that, burned with the same silver-blue light as hers, and its movements were slow, deliberate, and impossibly graceful for something so large. The construct paused, its gaze locking onto Ilaria. For a moment, the canyon was silent, the hum fading into a tense, expectant stillness. Then, in a voice that seemed to echo from the very earth itself, it spoke. "You should not be here, Keeper." Ilaria's breath hitched, her glowing veins dimming as she bowed her head. "I had no choice," she said softly. "They come for what was hidden." The construct turned its gaze to Thomas, its eyes narrowing slightly. "And the human?" Thomas stiffened, his grip tightening on his rifle. "I'm just here to help," he said, though he wasn't sure if that was entirely true anymore. The construct regarded him for a moment longer, then turned its attention back to Ilaria. "The balance is fragile. If they take what you guard, all will be lost." Ilaria nodded, her expression grim. "Then we must not let them." Above them, the hum of approaching ships grew louder, their shadows darkening the canyon floor. Thomas took a deep breath, his heart pounding. Whatever was coming next, he knew there was no turning back. The canyon walls vibrated under the growing cacophony of engines, the dark shapes of Chris Consortium ships blotting out the sun. Thomas stood at the edge of the gaping chasm, his rifle clutched tightly in his hands, the unfamiliar weight of fate pressing on his shoulders. Ilaria, still weak but standing with a grace that defied her frailty, watched the descending forces with a distant calm. Beside them, the towering construct, the Guardian, as she'd called it, remained unmoving, its luminous gaze fixed on the sky. "You need to tell me what we're dealing with," Thomas said, his voice sharp with tension. "What's in that hole? Why are they here?" Ilaria turned to him, her silver eyes filled with both sorrow and resolve. "They come for the heart," she said simply. "The heart?" "The core of all things," the Guardian rumbled, its voice a deep resonance that seemed to emanate from the canyon itself. "It is the last fragment of what was, Keeper. The final ember of creation's light, hidden within the womb of your people." Ilaria flinched at the words, her expression briefly flickering with guilt. "And now it has awakened because of me," she murmured. Thomas shook his head, frustration bubbling over. "That doesn't mean anything to me. What does this heart do? Why does Chris want it? The heart is neither a weapon nor a prize, Ilaria said, her tone weary. It is life and death, power beyond comprehension. To those who seek dominion, it promises unyielding control. To those who protect it, it offers hope. Hope doesn't win battles, Thomas snapped. Not against people like Chris. Ilaria's gaze hardened, her ancient features etched with a determination that seemed to transcend the frailty of her body. No, she said, but it wins wars, and this war began long before you or I existed. The first wave of soldiers descended from the lead ship, their figures outlined in the harsh glow of its landing lights, Chris's elite. Their armor was sleek and black, augmented with neural links and adaptive tech that gleamed under the dying sun. Thomas watched as they fanned out, their movements precise and predatory, weapons scanning the terrain. We can't take them all, he muttered. We are not meant to, Ilaria replied. She stepped forward, her body trembling, but her voice steady. The heart has chosen, Thomas Reed. The Guardian will not fight this battle for us. The burden falls on those who carry the weight of this time. The Guardian tilted its head, its glowing eyes dimming slightly. The Keeper speaks truth. I cannot intervene directly without breaking the balance, but there are threads I may weave. Thomas didn't understand what they were saying, but he could see the determination in Ilaria's eyes. There was no turning back now. Then tell me what to do, he said. Ilaria placed a hand on his chest, her touch cold but grounding. You must hold the line, she said. For every second you give me, I can draw closer to the heart and shield it from them. Alone? Thomas asked, his stomach twisting. She shook her head. I am never alone. The first shots rang out like thunderclaps, the soldiers' energy weapons carving through the canyon's rocky terrain. Thomas ducked behind a jagged outcrop, returning fire with precise bursts from his rifle. He wasn't trying to kill them. He didn't have the firepower for that, but he could slow them down, keep them from advancing too quickly. The Guardian stepped into the fray, its massive form glowing with ethereal light. Though it didn't strike directly, the very air around it seemed to twist and distort, creating barriers that deflected incoming fire. The soldiers hesitated, their tactical precision faltering in the face of this unknown force. Thomas used the distraction to his advantage, picking off a few of the soldiers' drones with well-placed shots. Each one exploded in a shower of sparks, briefly illuminating the battlefield. Behind him, Ilaria moved toward the chasm's edge, her steps unsteady but purposeful. Her hands glowed faintly, the same intricate patterns that marked her skin now etched in the air around her. She began to chant softly, the words incomprehensible but resonant, as if they carried the weight of countless lifetimes. The air grew heavy, charged with an unseen energy that made Thomas's skin prickle. He risked a glance over his shoulder, seeing Ilaria bathed in a shimmering aura that seemed to ripple outward, touching the edges of the chasm. The light within the abyss pulsed in response, growing brighter with each beat. What's she doing? Thomas asked, his voice strained as he ducked another barrage of fire. The Keeper calls to the heart, the Guardian said. She seeks to bind it, to hide it once more. Thomas swore under his breath. And Chris's goons are just going to let that happen, huh? They will try to stop her, the Guardian said, and you must ensure they fail. The second wave arrived with terrifying efficiency. Dropships deployed more soldiers, their ranks bolstered by hulking war droids that clanked heavily over the uneven terrain. These machines were brutal and unrelenting, their armored shells impervious to conventional weapons. Thomas felt a pang of despair as one of the droids unleashed a barrage of rockets, shattering the natural cover he'd been relying on. He rolled to the side, narrowly avoiding the explosion, and fired a shot that ricocheted harmlessly off the droid's hull. Suggestions? He called out to the Guardian, his voice tinged with desperation. The massive construct turned its glowing eyes to him. Trust in what you carry, human. Thomas frowned, then glanced at his rifle. It wasn't anything special, just a standard-issue energy weapon he'd salvaged years ago. But as he looked closer, he noticed something he hadn't before. Faint lines of light running along its barrel, pulsing faintly in time with the energy emanating from Ilaria. What the hell? He aimed at the nearest droid and pulled the trigger. The shot that emerged wasn't the usual sharp burst of plasma, but a concentrated beam of light that pierced the droid's armor, leaving a smoking hole in its chest. The machine froze for a moment, then collapsed in a heap of sparking metal. Thomas stared at his rifle in disbelief. Well, that's new. The battle raged on, the canyon becoming a chaotic swirl of fire and light. Thomas fought with a ferocity he hadn't felt in years, his rifle's newfound power turning the tide against the consortium forces. But the enemy's numbers were overwhelming, and for every soldier he took down, 2 more seemed to take their place. Through it all, Ilaria continued her chant, her voice rising and falling in harmony with the pulsing light of the heart. The chasm's glow grew brighter, casting eerie shadows across the battlefield. Then suddenly the light began to shift. It coalesced into a single, concentrated beam that shot upward, piercing the clouds and illuminating the darkening sky. Ilaria's chant faltered, her body trembling as the light enveloped her. "It is done," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the roar of the energy. Thomas turned to her, his heart pounding. "What's done? What did you do?" Ilaria didn't answer. Her knees buckled, and she collapsed to the ground, the light fading from her body. The Guardian stepped forward, its gaze fixed on the beam of light. The Keeper has sealed the heart once more, but the balance is not yet restored. Before Thomas could respond, a new sound cut through the chaos, the unmistakable roar of an approaching flagship. Governor Chris had arrived, and she wasn't coming alone. The flagship hovered above the canyon, its massive silhouette blotting out what little light remained. Its engines thrummed with an ominous rhythm, a heartbeat of inevitable confrontation. Below, the remnants of Chris's forces regrouped, the surviving soldiers taking defensive positions while the war droids recalibrated, their mechanical limbs moving with unsettling precision. Thomas knelt beside Ilaria, her frail body slumped against the cold stone. Her breathing was shallow, her face pallid, but her silver eyes remained open, fixed on the glowing rift above the chasm. The beam of light had dimmed, now a soft, pulsing thread connecting the ground to the heavens. "What now, Ilaria?" Thomas asked, his voice hoarse with exhaustion. "The heart is sealed, but Chris isn't going to back off. They'll tear this place apart to get to it." Ilaria's lips parted, but no words came. Instead, she reached for Thomas's hand, her fingers trembling as they closed around his. A faint warmth spread from her touch, and when Thomas looked into her eyes, he felt the weight of her centuries pressing down on him, an unbearable sorrow mingled with unyielding hope. "You must choose," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Thomas shook his head, frustrated. "Choose what? What are you talking about?" The Guardian loomed over them, its glowing gaze fixed on the flagship above. "The Keeper speaks of the final thread," it said, "the moment upon which all balances rest. The heart's power cannot remain here, not with the shadow of greed so near. It must be borne away or destroyed." The words hit Thomas like a physical blow. Destroyed? After all this? He gestured toward the canyon, the wreckage of battle and the glowing rift. "You can't just... This thing could save lives, bring peace, do something good." "It could," the Guardian agreed, "or it could bring devastation unlike anything your galaxy has ever known. Its potential is infinite, and therein lies the peril." The flagship's engines roared louder, and a new wave of soldiers descended on anti-gravity platforms, their weapons trained on the canyon floor. At their head stood Governor Chris, her armored figure cutting an imposing silhouette against the flickering light. "Thomas Reed," her voice boomed, amplified by a sonic emitter. "You fought well, but this is over. Surrender the Keeper and the artifact, and I might let you walk away alive." Thomas stood, his rifle still in his hand, and glared up at her. "You've got a funny way of negotiating, Chris." She laughed, a cold, humorless sound. "This isn't a negotiation, soldier. It's the inevitable." The power of the heart will be mine, and your stubbornness won't change that. Ilaria's grip tightened around Thomas's hand. She cannot touch the heart directly, she said, her voice firmer now. Its essence would burn her, as it would burn any who seek it with darkness in their hearts. Thomas glanced down at her, his mind racing. Then how do we stop her from getting to it? Ilaria's gaze softened, a bittersweet smile curving her lips. You already know the answer. As Chris's forces advanced, the Guardian stepped forward, its massive frame glowing brighter. I will hold them, it said, but my strength is finite. The decision must be made. Thomas turned back to Ilaria, his throat tightening. What happens if I take it? You would become its keeper, Ilaria said, her voice tinged with both pride and sorrow. Its power would be yours to wield, to protect, to safeguard. But it is not a burden easily borne. It will change you, in ways even I cannot foresee. And if I destroy it? The heart's light would be extinguished forever, Ilaria said, her voice breaking slightly. No one would wield its power, for good or ill. It would be the end of an age, but also the beginning of another. Thomas clenched his fists, his mind reeling. The idea of taking on such a responsibility was overwhelming, but the thought of snuffing out something so extraordinary felt like a betrayal. Above them, Chris's troops opened fire, their weapons hammering against the Guardian's glowing barriers. The construct stood firm, its arms outstretched as it absorbed the onslaught, but cracks began to form in its luminous armor. You're running out of time, Reed, Chris called, her voice dripping with malice. Make this easy on yourself. Surrender now, and I might even let the old woman live. Thomas's jaw tightened. He looked down at Ilaria, her fragile form illuminated by the faint light of the heart. What do you want me to do? He asked quietly. Ilaria's smile returned, softer now, filled with a deep, abiding love that transcended words. This is not my choice, she said. It never was. The heart called to you, Thomas. It has chosen you. Trust in yourself, as I trust in you. The Guardian's barrier shattered with a deafening crack, and Chris's forces surged forward. Thomas raised his rifle, ready to fight, but Ilaria reached up and touched his arm. Go, she said. He hesitated for only a moment before nodding. Slinging the rifle over his shoulder, he turned and ran toward the chasm, the glowing rift now pulsing faster as if in response to his approach. Behind him, the Guardian unleashed a final, blinding burst of light, forcing the advancing troops to shield their eyes. Chris shouted orders, but her voice was drowned out by the roar of the canyon as the heart's energy intensified. Thomas reached the edge of the chasm and hesitated, staring down into the abyss. The light seemed to beckon him, its warmth washing over him like a gentle tide. Thomas! Chris's voice was closer now, and he turned to see her, flanked by 2 war droids, her weapon trained on him. Don't be a fool. That power is wasted on you. Give it to me and I'll make sure it's used properly. Thomas laughed bitterly. Properly? You mean for conquest and control. For order, Chris corrected. For the greater good. Thomas shook his head. I've heard that line before. It always ends the same way. He looked back at the chasm, his heart pounding. Ilaria's words echoed in his mind. Trust in yourself. Taking a deep breath, he stepped into the light. The world dissolved into brilliance, a sea of pure energy that surged through Thomas's body. He felt everything, the weight of the heart's power, the echoes of its ancient purpose, the infinite possibilities it held. In that moment, he understood. The heart wasn't just a tool or a weapon. It was a choice, a reflection of the one who wielded it. When the light faded, Thomas stood alone at the canyon's edge. The rift was gone. The heart's energy dispersed into the ether. Chris's forces were retreating, their leader glaring at him with a mixture of fury and frustration. You'll regret this, she spat before turning away. Thomas watched her go, then looked back at Ilaria. She smiled at him one last time before her body dissolved into light, her essence merging with the heart's fading glow. In the weeks that followed, Thomas wandered the galaxy, carrying the memory of Ilaria and the weight of the Heart's legacy. He would never be the same, but he had made his choice. And somewhere in the quiet corners of the universe, the Heart's light remained, waiting for the day it might be needed again. The planet was nothing but a jagged scar against the endless night of space, a dying world marred by constant storms and shattered landscapes, where survival was nothing short of an art. Kaylin had been left to die here, but death was never an option for someone like her, not when the thirst pulsed beneath her skin like a living thing, an insatiable hunger for blood that no amount of time could ever dull. Her heart, beating too fast, too erratic, echoed in the hollow silence of her prison, a prison made of rusting metal and the wreckage of those who had come before her. The walls were a tomb, but it was not her tomb. Not yet. A faint sound, a scrape, cut through the oppressive silence. Her body tensed, but she didn't move. She couldn't. The restraints that held her were not the typical prison chains. No, these were designed to suppress the most dangerous parts of her. The claws, the fangs, the thirst. The very things that made her a nightmare to those who knew her name. Her blood boiled beneath the synthetic bindings, the hunger growing sharper, fiercer. It clawed at her mind, pulling her deeper into the abyss. It was all she could focus on, the red haze that threatened to engulf everything. She had been captured by her own kind, betrayed, left to rot in this hellhole. And yet, there was something else, something she couldn't explain. The scrape grew louder, more pronounced, as though the universe itself was trying to shake her from her trance. She blinked. The reality of the situation snapped back into place. She was still alive, and that meant there was still a chance to escape, to fight, to rip out the hearts of those who had done this to her. Her eyes, glowing faintly in the dim light of the prison cell, narrowed in on the door. It was slightly ajar, just enough for a shadow to slip through. It didn't make sense. The guards would never leave it like this. It was too careless. Someone was here. Someone had come for her. The door creaked, and then, like the sudden release of tension in a drawn bowstring, the shadow materialized. A figure cloaked in the darkness of the cell stepped into view. The stranger's movements were fluid, practiced, but there was a hesitation in the air, a pause that lingered too long to be casual. Her fangs glinted in the low light, and for a moment Kaylin considered the possibility that this was another trap. But the feeling in her chest, the one that came with every inch of her blood pulsing against the confines of the restraints, told her otherwise. This wasn't a trap. This was something else. The figure moved closer, and for the first time in days, Kaylin's sharp senses detected something more than the thirst. She could smell it. His scent. Human. Kaylin's lips curled into a bitter smile, the first flicker of emotion in days. A human. What was one of them doing here? She remained still, her eyes tracking his every movement, the blood in her veins urging her to act, to kill. But something in the human's eyes, or perhaps the calm with which he moved, held her back. There was a familiarity in his posture, something she couldn't quite place. He didn't seem like a typical mercenary or a soldier. The figure knelt beside her, his face partially obscured by the low light. His breath was steady, unhurried. He didn't seem afraid, even though he should be. "You're not supposed to be here," Kaylin rasped, her voice hoarse from days of disuse. The human didn't flinch at her words. He simply reached into his coat, pulling out a small tool, a lockbreaker. Kaylin watched him, an involuntary smirk tugging at the corners of her mouth. "Neither are you," he replied, his voice low and gravelly, as if it had been a long time since he'd spoken to anyone. With deft hands, he worked at the restraints holding her, the light flickering with each movement. She tensed as the pressure on her limbs shifted, the first taste of freedom in days, but she didn't move, didn't trust it. Not yet. "Why are you helping me?" she asked, her voice cutting through the air like a blade. The human hesitated, his fingers stilling on the lock for a moment before continuing. "I'm not here to help you. I'm here to get out. Kaylin's blood burned hotter, the answer not quite fitting, but the lock broke with a final click, and she was free. Free from the chains, free from the prison. For the first time in too long, she felt her claws extend, felt her power surge. But as she rose to her feet, every instinct screamed at her to tear him apart, to rip into his flesh and drain him dry. It would be so easy, so satisfying, but the human didn't move. He just stood there, waiting. "Don't," he said simply, as if he'd anticipated the surge of violence that always followed her freedom. His voice was low, steady. "If you kill me, you'll never get out. If you come with me, I can help you." Kaylin's eyes flashed red in the dimness, and she took a step forward, her gaze locked onto his throat. She could almost taste his blood already, but there was something in his stance, something in the way he looked at her, that stopped her. "I don't trust you," she hissed, her teeth bared, her voice thick with the weight of 1,000 past betrayals. He shrugged, the smallest movement, but his eyes were unwavering. "You don't have to trust me. But if you don't, we both die here, and I doubt you want that." The space between them grew heavy with tension. The air crackled, the sharp edge of her bloodlust a constant hum against the silence. Kaylin's breathing slowed, the sound of her pulse steadying. For a moment, all she could hear was the ringing of her own heartbeat, louder than anything else. And then she made her decision. With a hiss of frustration, she stepped back. "Lead the way, human. But know this. If you betray me, I'll be the last thing you ever see." Noah Bennett didn't flinch. He simply nodded, stepping aside to allow her to follow. As she moved past him, her senses flared, every step echoing in the stillness. He was a mystery, as enigmatic as the world they stood on, and Kaylin didn't know whether to trust him or kill him. But for now, she had no choice but to follow. After all, survival was a game she knew well. And if she was going to survive, she would need to know more about the man who had just thrown her into the chaos of an escape she wasn't sure she wanted. The door behind them clicked shut, and they were gone. The mystery of Kaylin's past, the dark motives of her would-be savior, and the dangerous galaxy they were both ensnared in would unfold with every step. But for now, there was only one thing she knew for certain. She would never stop running. The corridors of the abandoned facility were alive with echoes, footsteps, distant clanks, and the sound of heavy breathing hers. Every muscle in Kaylin's body was coiled with tension as she followed the human, Noah Bennett, down the dimly lit passage. The shadows swallowed them, and yet they could never escape the growing sense of urgency that gnawed at her insides. The hunger, the thirst, was a constant weight she could not shake. She didn't trust him. She couldn't. But for now, there was something else that kept her moving. Something far older than the ache of betrayal. Something primal, perhaps even more dangerous than her own bloodlust. The need for survival. And for that, she would need him. They moved silently through the labyrinthine complex, the faint hum of malfunctioning power grids, and the occasional creak of aging metal, the only sounds that accompanied their every step. The air smelled of decay, of something long forgotten. Kaylin's sharp eyes darted across the hallway, scanning every corner for threats. But the facility, empty as it was, felt far from abandoned. Noah led her without a word, his pace unhurried, almost too calm. As if he knew this place as well as he knew the back of his hand. She couldn't shake the suspicion that he was more than just a mercenary, more than just someone thrown into this madness by fate. But she didn't dare ask. Not yet. Her mind, ever alert, kept drifting back to the moment when he freed her from the cell. How had he gotten past the guards? How had he known she was there? More importantly, what was it he wanted? She had no reason to believe that he was here out of kindness, especially not when he had made it clear that his goal was the same as hers, to get out. But his calm demeanor, his assuredness, suggested that there was more to his story, more than he was telling her. They reached a dead-end corridor, the walls scarred with age and neglect. There was a faint flicker of light overhead as Noah stopped and turned, his eyes scanning the walls for something. "What are we doing here?" Kaylin's voice was low, edged with a suspicion she could no longer hide. Noah didn't answer immediately. Instead, his fingers brushed across the wall, pausing at a small section where the surface seemed different. He pushed, and with a soft hiss, a hidden door slid open, revealing a narrow staircase leading downward into complete darkness. "Down there," he said simply, his voice cool and distant. Kaylin didn't move. She stared at the opening, her instincts screaming at her to turn away, to flee, but there was nowhere else to go, was there? And as much as she hated the thought, Noah Bennett might just be her only way out. Without another word, she followed him into the depths of the facility. The air grew colder as they descended, the metallic scent thickening as the shadows deepened. The silence between them felt heavy, laden with the unspoken tension that neither of them dared to address. Every step felt like it carried them further away from the fragile thread of control Kaylin had over herself. And yet, there was something else, a new, unsettling sense of danger creeping in. It wasn't just the hunger gnawing at her insides. It wasn't just the feeling of being watched. It was the whisper, a soft undercurrent of something she couldn't quite hear, but she felt it, a hum in the very walls. "Do you hear that?" she murmured. Noah's steps faltered, and he looked over his shoulder. His eyes, narrow in the dim light, studied her for a moment before he spoke. "Hear what?" Kaylin's gaze shot to the walls, to the shifting shadows that seemed to move of their own accord. She could feel them now, pressing in on her from all sides. Her senses screamed at her to leave. The hunger, the thirst, the rage, all of it surged up, but she pushed it back. She couldn't let herself lose control again. Not yet. The humming sound deepened, vibrating in the very bones of the structure. And then, nothing. Silence. "What the hell is going on?" Kaylin's voice was tight with unease. Noah didn't answer right away. Instead, he stopped at the bottom of the staircase, his hand brushing against the cold metal door that stood in their way. His fingers hovered for a moment before he pushed against it with a deliberate force, and the door groaned open. "What's in there?" Kaylin's voice was low, almost a whisper, but her suspicion was undeniable. Noah hesitated. For the first time, a flicker of uncertainty crossed his face, like a shadow passing over his expression. "I'm not sure," he said, his voice lower than before, "but it's the only way forward." The door slid open fully, revealing an enormous, cavernous chamber. The walls were lined with strange machinery, whirring and clicking in eerie synchrony, their lights flickering intermittently. The air was thick with the scent of oil and ozone, and the faint sound of hissing steam filled the silence. At the center of the room stood a large, cylindrical pod, its surface glowing with an unsettling blue light. It was unlike anything Kaylin had ever seen. It pulsed, as if alive, as if it had a heartbeat of its own. She stepped forward, drawn to it, her blood burning with an instinct she couldn't explain. "Stay back," Noah warned, his voice sharp. "That's not something you want to touch." But Kaylin couldn't hear him anymore. The closer she got, the more the hunger roared to life inside her. It wasn't just the thirst, it was something more, something dark and ancient that began to stir in the depths of her mind. Her fingers twitched, longing to reach out, to feel the energy that emanated from the pod. "Noah," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "What is this?" Noah's face was hard now, his jaw clenched in a way that suggested he was holding back something vital, something important. But before he could answer, a sound interrupted them, a low mechanical whine, followed by a grinding noise that shook the room. Kaylin spun around, her senses on high alert. Her eyes darted over the room, and that's when she saw them. Figures, shadows moving in the corners of the chamber, their forms blurred and indistinct. It wasn't just the hunger now, it was fear. "Get away from the pod," Noah shouted, grabbing her by the arm. But it was too late. The room came alive with movement, and the shadows detached from the walls, figures clothed in dark armor, their faces hidden beneath helmets. They moved with purpose, and in an instant, Kaelin knew. They were not here for the pod. They were here for her. The tension snapped like a taut wire. A hiss echoed from the walls, and Kaelin felt it, the sensation of being trapped, the walls closing in. And Noah. Noah was nowhere to be found. Kaelin's pulse surged, her senses flooded with the promise of violence, of blood. Her claws extended, and the hunt began. She didn't wait to understand what was happening, or why. She couldn't. She had no choice but to fight, to survive. The first soldier lunged at her, and Kaelin met him head-on, the force of her attack sending him crashing into the wall. The sound of his helmet cracking under the impact was deafening, and as he crumpled to the floor, she turned, ready for the next one. But then she froze. Noah. He was standing in the doorway watching her, his expression unreadable. And then she realized he wasn't here to help her. Not anymore. The true game had just begun. The chaos in the chamber was immediate, a rush of adrenaline that drowned out every coherent thought Kaelin had ever possessed. The soldiers were all around her now, circling, their movements synchronized, each of them a part of some greater design she didn't understand. Her senses flared, each moment stretching out like a taut wire ready to snap. They were closing in. But then she saw it. Through the haze of motion and violence, through the chaos of combat, Kaelin's gaze locked with Noah's. For a single eternal moment, their eyes met. His unreadable, hers brimming with fury, confusion, and something else she wasn't ready to name. He wasn't running. He wasn't even trying to fight. He was simply watching. Her heart hammered in her chest as the realization hit her with the force of a lightning strike. Noah was not here to help her. Not now, not ever. Her next move was instinctive. As a soldier, as a creature of instinct and blood, she lashed out with everything she had, her claws raking across the closest soldier's chest. The sound of armor scraping against bone echoed through the room, but there was no time to savor the victory. The next soldier was already upon her. The clang of metal on metal was deafening as she parried a strike, her body moving fluidly in a dance of life and death. The room felt smaller now, suffocating, the walls pressing in. Sweat beaded on her brow, and her breath came in shallow gasps. She couldn't let her guard down. Not now. Not ever. She spun, sidestepping a blade that sliced through the air where her throat had been a split second ago. The soldiers were good. Too good. They were trained for this, whatever this was, and Kaelin was already starting to feel the weight of the battle. She couldn't keep this up much longer. Then, in the midst of the madness, something strange happened. The hum in the air, the one she had been so sure was just her imagination, grew louder. It thrummed, vibrating the very floor beneath her feet, like the heartbeat of the facility itself. The pod. Her attention flickered toward it, the strange, pulsating object at the center of the room. Something about it had changed. The blue glow was brighter now, pulsing in time with the strange vibration that seemed to be coming from deep within the very walls. Was it alive? Was it calling to her? Kaelin hesitated. That was a mistake. Before she could react, a soldier lunged at her, grabbing her by the arm and twisting it behind her back with a brutal force. Pain shot through her body, a blinding white-hot agony that made her gasp. She gritted her teeth against it, her breath quickening, but her limbs felt sluggish, her movements less controlled. The soldier's helmet hovered inches from her face. "You've been a problem," he murmured, his voice deep and metallic. But not for long. Her body burned with the need to escape. With a sharp, feral twist, Kaelin broke free from the soldier's grasp, shoving him back with a strength that surprised even her. But the effort drained her. She felt a wave of dizziness hit her, her vision blurring. Another soldier approached, but before Kaelin could react, a flash of movement, quick, too quick, interrupted the battle. Noah. He was standing at the entrance, but now his face was cold, distant. His eyes no longer held that initial flicker of humanity. Instead, they were calculating, indifferent, as though watching a play unfold before him, And then, in one fluid motion, he raised a weapon, something Kaylin had never seen before, and aimed it directly at her. Her heart skipped a beat. "Noah," she said, the name a quiet, desperate breath. "What are you—" Before she could finish the sentence, the shot rang out. Kaylin didn't feel it at first. She didn't even register the searing pain that tore through her side. But then the world around her slowed, distorted. She staggered, her breath coming in harsh, ragged gasps. The floor rose up to meet her, and then everything went black. When Kaylin awoke, it wasn't to the comfort of familiarity. The harsh scent of antiseptic filled her nostrils, mingling with the cold tang of metal. Her head throbbed, and the sharp sting in her side was a reminder of the shot she had taken. She blinked, trying to focus on her surroundings, but everything was out of focus, disjointed. Her hands were bound to a chair, and her body was held in place by cold, unforgiving restraints. The room was small, lit only by the faint glow of a single overhead light. The walls were smooth, metallic, and featureless, nothing like the facility she had just been in. The hum from before had disappeared, replaced by the unsettling quiet. Kaylin's breath hitched as she tried to sit up, only to be met by a sharp pain that shot through her side. She hissed, slumping back into the chair. "Take it easy," a voice said, cutting through the silence. "Noah." She looked up. There he was, standing in the corner of the room, leaning against the wall with a cold, unreadable expression on his face. The weapon was gone, but the way he held himself, guarded, distant, told her everything she needed to know. He wasn't the ally she thought he was. "You're awake," he said, his voice calm, detached. "Good. I wasn't sure how long the sedative would last." "Why?" Kaylin's voice was rough, barely a whisper. She struggled against the restraints, but it was pointless. "Why did you do it? Why shoot me?" Noah didn't answer immediately. He shifted, his gaze lingering on her before he spoke. "Because you're not supposed to be here." Kaylin's mind raced, but the pain in her side and the pounding in her skull made it hard to concentrate. She tried to piece together what he was saying. "What do you mean?" He moved toward her slowly, the sound of his boots on the metal floor louder in the silence. "This is bigger than you or me. This facility, it's not just some abandoned ruin, it's a containment zone." "Containment?" Kaylin's eyes narrowed, her pulse quickening as pieces of the puzzle clicked into place. "Containment for what?" He didn't immediately answer. Instead, he leaned in close, lowering his voice to a dangerous whisper. "For you." Kaylin's heart stopped. Her mind whirled. Containment for her. She had known something wasn't right, that she didn't belong here. But to be the target, to be the thing they were trying to hold back, to control. Noah took a step back, his gaze cold and distant. "The truth is, Kaylin, you don't know what you are, and neither do I." The room seemed to tilt, everything spinning out of control. The air felt thick with secrets, and Kaylin realized, with an icy certainty, that this wasn't just about escape anymore. This was about survival, not just from the soldiers, not just from the facility, but from the thing inside her, from whatever Noah had been trying to protect all along. And now there was nowhere to run. "Why are you helping them?" she asked, her voice trembling with a mix of fury and disbelief. "What do they want with me?" Noah didn't answer. Instead, he turned, his back to her, his face unreadable once more. And as the door to the room slid open, Kaylin realized that this was only the beginning of something much darker than she could ever have imagined. The true question was she the weapon or was she the target? The hum of the facility reverberated in Kaylin's ears as she sat in the cold, unforgiving chair, her wrists still bound, her side aching from the gunshot wound. She had long since stopped trying to free herself, her strength fading with every passing moment. But it wasn't just the physical restraints that held her in place. It was the weight of Noah's words, his revelation that gnawed at her consciousness. Containment for you. What did he mean? What was she? The questions spiraled in her mind, each one more maddening than the last, the answers just out of reach, as if they were buried deep beneath the surface of the world she thought she knew. Noah had turned his back on her, and now he paced the room, his every movement controlled, measured. He was waiting for something. But what? For her to break? For her to ask the right questions? "I don't understand," Kaylin said, her voice hoarse from the struggle. She tested the restraints once more, but it was futile. She met his eyes, her gaze hard. "What is this place? What are they trying to do to me?" Noah didn't look at her immediately. His face, impassive, was lit by the faint glow of the overhead light. The shadows cast across his features made him seem almost foreign. She had thought she knew him, but now, with every passing second, she realized how little she truly understood about the man she had once trusted. "It's not about what they're trying to do to you," he said, his voice cold, almost distant. "It's about what you are." Kaylin's breath caught in her throat. She wanted to scream, to rage at him, to demand answers, but the words stuck in her chest like a lump of ice. "Who are they, Noah?" she asked, forcing the words out despite the tremor in her voice. "Who is behind this? What do they want from me?" For a moment, he remained silent, his gaze flickering over her, as if weighing her words. Finally, he spoke, his voice quieter now, tinged with something close to regret. "You're asking the wrong questions." "Then tell me what the right questions are," Kaylin snapped, the frustration and fear threatening to spill over. "Tell me what I am and why you're here." He stepped closer, the distance between them closing. "You are the answer." The words hung in the air, sharp and cold. Kaylin's mind raced, but nothing made sense. The implications of his statement, his cryptic answers, threatened to unravel her. She stared at him, her eyes narrowing, trying to see beneath the layers of deception, trying to find the man she had once known. But he wasn't the same Noah, not anymore. "Answer to what?" she demanded, her breath coming faster now, a feverish edge creeping into her voice. He hesitated, his expression shifting, fleetingly revealing something behind the mask, a flicker of pain or maybe guilt, but it was gone too quickly for Kaylin to decipher. "The truth is more complicated than you know," he said softly, almost as if to himself. "The truth about you, the truth about me, about everything." Before she could respond, the sound of the door sliding open interrupted them. A figure entered the room, tall and imposing. The uniform was different from the soldiers, more sophisticated, more calculated. Kaylin's pulse quickened. The figure didn't speak, but there was something in the way they moved, something unsettling about their presence. It was as though the very air shifted when they stepped into the room. Noah stiffened, but said nothing. His gaze flickered toward Kaylin before looking back at the newcomer. Kaylin could feel the shift in the room. The tension was palpable, thick as a storm cloud ready to burst. She could see the unease in Noah's posture, something she hadn't seen in him before. The figure, an older man with graying hair and a face marked by age and authority, stood just inside the doorway. His eyes were cold, assessing, and he seemed to ignore Kaylin completely, his focus solely on Noah. "We're ready," the man said, his voice rough but precise. Noah nodded, his jaw tightening. "Not yet," Noah replied, his voice low. "We need more time. She's still not—" The older man cut him off, his expression hardening. "You're wasting time. The project's success is non-negotiable. If she's not ready, we move forward anyway." A cold chill ran through Kaylin at the mention of project. She had no idea what they were talking about, but the implications were terrifying. "Move forward with what?" Kaylin demanded, her voice sharp, but her body still weak from the injury. "What's the project?" The older man turned his gaze on her for the first time, and there was something in his eyes, something calculating, something that made her skin crawl. "Don't worry about that," he said. dismissing her with a flick of his hand. Just focus on surviving. Kaylin's heart thudded painfully in her chest. Surviving? What was he talking about? Her head spun as the room seemed to close in on her. Noah, she said, her voice breaking through the fog of confusion. Tell me what's happening. But Noah didn't answer. His eyes were on the older man, his fists clenched at his sides. His silence spoke louder than any words could. Get her ready, the older man said, his tone final. Before Kaylin could respond, the door slid shut behind the man, leaving her alone with Noah once again. She turned her gaze toward him, trying to read his expression, but it was as unreadable as ever. Get me ready for what? She asked, her voice trembling now. What is this? Noah took a step back, his shoulders slumping slightly, as if the weight of his own secrets was finally catching up to him. I don't know, he said quietly, the words laced with an unsettling truth. But I'm afraid you're about to find out. Kaylin stared at him, her pulse racing as the realization began to settle like a cold stone in her chest. There was no more time. Whatever was coming, whatever they were planning, it was already in motion. She had no more questions. She had no more strength to demand answers. All she had left was fear, and an overwhelming sense that whatever she was about to face, she might not survive it. Noah took a step back, his gaze never leaving hers. I didn't want this for you, he whispered, his voice filled with a sorrow she hadn't expected. But there's no going back. And with that, the door opened again, and the room was plunged back into darkness. Kaylin's breath caught in her throat as she realized with a sickening certainty that she had been played. Every step, every word, every moment had been part of the plan. She was no longer just a prisoner. She was the key, and there was no turning back. Kaylin stood on the precipice of everything she had known, everything she had once believed. The corridors of the facility stretched ahead of her, each step echoing through the silence like a heartbeat, but there was no going back now. She had crossed a line, a point of no return, and everything had been set into motion the moment she'd stepped inside this place. The door before her loomed, a final barrier between her and the truth she had been desperately trying to understand. The truth about herself, about Noah, and about the project. Her mind was a storm, the voices of the men. Noah, the older man and the others, repeating in her ears, their words entwined with the uncertainty that had become her life. But now, standing here, with everything finally laid out before her, there was no fear left. There was only clarity, sharp and cold as ice. The facility hummed with an unsettling stillness. The air felt thick, as if it too was holding its breath, waiting for something or someone to make the first move. Kaylin's fingers brushed against the cold metal of the door, and with a steadying breath, she pushed it open. The room beyond was dimly lit, its walls lined with rows of sterile equipment. There, at the center of the room, stood a figure. She couldn't tell at first if it was a person, a machine, or something else entirely, but the shape was unmistakable. A woman, or something that resembled one, bound by tubes and wires, her skin pale and almost translucent under the soft lights. Her face was obscured, her eyes hidden beneath a veil of shadows, but Kaylin felt the weight of her presence like a shiver running down her spine. This was it. This was the moment that had been pulling her in. This was the final piece of the puzzle. She didn't need to ask who it was. She already knew. It was her, or at least a version of her. The realization hit her with the force of a blow. She had known deep down that this was coming, that she had been something else, something more, something they had been trying to unlock. But standing in front of herself, her clone or whatever this was, the truth settled over her like a cold weight. She wasn't just a prisoner. She was part of the very experiment that had begun this whole nightmare. She could hear Noah's voice in her head, warning her that there was no turning back. But that wasn't the part that haunted her now. It was the truth of her own existence. What had they made her into? What was the point of it all? Kaylin, a voice called out from behind her. She spun around, her heart racing. There, standing in the doorway, was Noah. His expression was unreadable, his features drawn, as if someone, had drained the life from him. "Noah," she whispered, but the word barely left her lips before he stepped forward. His gaze locked on her with an intensity that made her stomach drop. "I never wanted you to find out like this," he said quietly, his voice rough with regret. "I never wanted you to see what they've done, but I couldn't stop it." Kaylin swallowed hard, her throat tight with the weight of the truth that was unraveling before her. "What have they done? What have you done?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he stepped closer, his eyes flickering over her face as if searching for something, some sign that she still recognized him. "You're not the first, Kaylin," Noah said, his voice barely above a whisper. "You're not even close to the first, but you were different. They knew it from the moment you walked in. You were special." His words hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Kaylin could feel the weight of them pressing down on her, the truth slowly suffusing her like poison in her veins. "They used me," she said, the words tasting bitter on her tongue. "And they used you, didn't they?" Noah flinched, his expression flickering with something like pain, but it was gone before she could read it fully. He nodded once, sharply, as if it was the only answer he could give. "They created you, Kaylin," he continued, his voice raw. "They wanted to unlock something in you, something they could use. But you were never supposed to know. You were never supposed to remember." Kaylin's mind reeled, the pieces clicking together with a sickening certainty. This facility, the experiments, the people she had met, it had all been a lie. She had been nothing more than a tool, a subject in a game far larger than she had ever realized. She looked back at the figure in the center of the room, her mind screaming. How many others? How many had they made before her? "You're part of me," Kaylin said, the words tasting like ash. It wasn't a question anymore. This is what they've been doing all along." Noah's eyes darkened, his lips pressed into a thin line. "You have no idea the things they've made me do to keep you here, to keep you alive." "I'm not alive," Kaylin spat, her voice trembling with rage. "Not like this, not like her." The other Kaylin in the center of the room stirred, the mechanical whirring of machines punctuating the eerie stillness. The clone, or whatever it was, lifted its head, revealing eyes that were identical to Kaylin's own, but lifeless, hollow, as if the spark of humanity had long since been extinguished. A terrible thought struck her. Was this what they had meant for her? "I never had a choice, Kaylin," Noah said, his voice barely audible now. "You think I wanted this? I couldn't save you. I couldn't save myself." Kaylin's pulse thundered in her ears, the urgency in his words hammering against her resolve. She didn't know what to feel anymore. Anger, betrayal, fear. She was numb to it all. But then, amid the fog of her emotions, she saw it. The exit. The door that would lead her out of this place. She didn't know what lay beyond it, but she knew one thing: she couldn't stay. Kaylin turned her back on Noah, her decision final. She wasn't running from the truth anymore. She was facing it. But as she stepped toward the door, she paused. Her gaze flickered back to Noah, his face frozen in a look of helplessness. "You had a choice too," she said, her voice cold. And with that, she walked out of the room, leaving him and everything else behind. As the door slid shut behind her, Kaylin's heart was no longer heavy with questions. It was filled with one undeniable truth. She had the power to choose her own future now, and that at least was hers to make.